Good evening and welcome to the latest installment in this fall's 2020 Mansfield Dialogue Series. I'm Rob Saldine, the Director of Ethics and Public Affairs at the Mansfield Center. Tonight we'll be previewing the upcoming legislative session that begins next month. Our event is being streamed live on Facebook. Some of you may be new to Zoom, so please do indulge me for a moment as I go over a few of the basics. First, please be sure to keep your sound muted throughout the dialogue. Second, if you'd like to have your screen show only the speaker, go to the top right corner of your screen and set it to speaker view rather than gallery view. If you click on it, you can switch back and forth between those two options. Third, we really hope that tonight meets the definition of a dialogue, at least as best we can in this electronic medium. So we encourage you to use the chat box for civil discourse, to post questions and comments there throughout our session. I'll be keeping an eye on the chat and drawing on some of those questions posted by the audience later in the program. So with that, let me briefly introduce our guests tonight. We are very fortunate to have some of the leading figures in the legislature with us. Representative Kim Abbott is the Democratic leader in the House of Representatives. She's from Helena, where she's the co-director of the Montana Human Rights Network. Senator Mark Blaisdell is a Republican, and he is the president of the Senate. He's a businessman from Kalispell. Representative Wiley Galt is the Speaker of the House. He's a Republican and a rancher from Martinsdale. And finally, Republican Senator Jason Small is a livestock producer from Busby, and he's a Northern Cheyenne tribal member. He's the chair of the State Tribal Relations Interim Committee, and during the session, he'll also be serving as vice chair of both the Natural Resources Committee and the Energy and Telecommunications Committee. So thank you all for joining us tonight. I've told each of our guests that they could have several minutes to make some introductory comments, and we'll stick with that alphabetical order for that part, which means Representative Abbott, you are up first.
Thanks. Thanks, Robert and Dina, the Mansfield Center and University of Montana for having me tonight. I appreciate it. And thanks to the speaker and the president and Senator Smalls for not canceling when he found out it was me on the Democratic side. I appreciate that too. I'm thrilled to be here and thrilled to be able to talk to you all about, what we're approaching the session thinking about as Democrats coming up in January. I think all of us know that this is going to be a unique session. It's happening in the context of a global pandemic and the health and economic turmoil that pandemic has caused, and we all recognize that. But in addition to that, Republicans are in control of the governor's office and both chambers of the legislature for the first time in almost 20 years. And that's an immense responsibility to govern in complicated and challenging times. And we understand that as well. The Democratic caucus is approaching this session knowing that over the last 3 sessions, we have been the majority of votes on landmark legislation that has created jobs, boosted our economy, stabilized and improved our healthcare system, and invested in our workforce. And we hope that Republicans will join us in protecting those achievements and expanding them. On infrastructure, just as an example, we are really focused on prioritizing rural broadband. We think that is a game changer for rural economic development. It will create jobs, it will increase equity, and it can be a bridge on the divide of tribal nations, rural communities, and urban centers. And we're excited to pursue that and hope that Republicans will pursue that with us. We need to continue to invest in our workforce. We know that. We're facing uncertain economic times, and we need to invest in public education and a variety of strategies to make sure that our workforce can meet the challenges that are ahead of us. And that on the other side of this, there are jobs there for people that need them and count on them. The healthcare industry, we know, is one of the fastest growing industries in the state of Montana. It is an economic driver. And right now it is as critical as it has ever been. We know as a caucus that we need to support doctors and nurses, other providers, frontline workers, and hospitals as we move through this pandemic and look to our economic future. And of course, our caucus will be laser focused on the Montana families that are bearing the brunt of both the health and economic impacts of this pandemic. We think that there are policy solutions to help families weather this and come out on the other side with an economy that can thrive and jobs that can support their families. The last thing that I'll say is, and I've talked to all of the other panelists about this, Wiley and I at length, we recognize that the way that we behave in the Capitol building has an impact hundreds of miles outside those walls. And the way that we conduct ourselves, organize ourselves, and run the people's business during the session, the Capitol is a workplace, and it needs to be a safe workplace for the public, for the press corps, for staff in that building, and for legislators. And we look forward to working together with Republicans on that. So thanks again. Can't wait for the discussion.
Thanks. Senator Blaisdell.
Sure. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here tonight. It's always a pleasure. It's great to be on here with such a great panel of my colleagues that I've served with for quite a few years. It's always a pleasure to work with them as well. I think I echo a lot of what Representative Abbott said. I think all of us recognize the gravity of this session coming up and the challenges that we're going to face of not only how to operate and manage the session, fulfill our obligation for public input and testimony, and recognize the safety of our staff, our legislative members, and everybody else. And obviously there are challenges with that. And Montana is a very diverse state and has very diverse opinions on their views. And so we want to make sure that we have an ability for all of them to be able to interact and engage in this process as we work through it. It's an exciting time. This is actually my second time not only being in leadership, but also coming into a session with a new administration. I served as speaker with Governor-elect Bullock at the time when he first came in, and now with Governor-elect Gianforte. It's always an exciting time when there's a change of administration, fresh ideas, kind of some new vision and new goals. Really actually had an enjoyable session, that first session, working with Governor Bullock and going back and forth. Although we never always agreed, we did we all both learned on the job as we went through that. So, a lot of the priorities for us is, as a small business owner that's certainly in the restaurant catering business, is seeing the brunt of the COVID-19 and the restrictions and the challenges that it's faced. I recognize that there are a lot of small family businesses and operations across the state that are really struggling. And I really want to work with Governor-elect Gianforte and our caucus and every member of the legislature in implementing his provisions as he lays out his Montana Comeback Plan, how we can do that to create and open these businesses back up in a safe manner and be able to help them flourish once again. So I look forward to a productive session. We certainly have a lot of challenges as we work through it. But I think there's an incredible amount of leadership on both sides of the aisle that are committed to doing that. And I look forward to working through the session with them.
Speaker Gall.
Thank you. I won't hammer home what the other two have said, but it is going to be a very fluid session. I don't think we quite have the picture of what it looks like yet. So I'm thankful for Kim's and my friendship that we've been able to have a lot of frank conversations and able to talk with each other, pretty pointedly to try to get to a point where everyone kind of feels comfortable moving forward. And what I'm really looking for in the session as a rancher and, representing one of the largest industries in Montana is helping us get back on our feet with the supply chain shock we've had through COVID. And I'm also a bar owner as well, so I understand what some of these shutdowns have done to these businesses. So I'm just looking forward to get everyone back to work and getting the economy rolling again.
Senator Small.
To say thank you guys for letting me have the opportunity to speak here tonight. I definitely a high kind of makes me feel like I should have ran for some kind of leadership role at this point, so I'd fit in. But anyway, my expectations, I guess, for the session is to hopefully make this thing work out. Nobody knows necessarily what we're doing yet. We might be up there for a bit. We might be gone a little bit. COVID's definitely a hot topic, and it happens. It's I've had it. My family's had it. Almost everybody I know has had it at this point. And in the end, I'm hoping that we can get some good, solid legislation passed. Of course, get the budget balanced and get it passed for the next several years. And I'd like to. I hope we make some great strides in making progress for employment opportunities. We can develop a place where some of these businesses can begin to thrive again, take off. I mean, everybody's needing it. The unemployment's been unreasonably high, and it's been a tough year on people. So my priorities as this moves along is I'm wanting to support mental health and healthcare in general. I think that's very important for Montana, the Indian reservations, and just industry in general. I mean, it's a huge economic driver. I'd like to continue to try to expand opportunities for some of the Montana tribes and their tribal members. And as far as that goes, concerns for the session for me itself, since I'm not in a leadership position, I want this to maintain a real fluid and moving. I'd like to see it go smoothly and not have any glitches in the process this year. And hopefully at the end of the day, we can step back and everybody can look and say, well, we did a great job. So that's about it.
Thanks, everyone. Representative Abbott, you mentioned the new dynamic in place in Helena, right? For basically the first time in nearly a generation, we're going to have a solidly Republican legislature and a Republican governor. And yet recent sessions have seen an important split within the Republican caucuses between the conservatives, which most recently have gone by this name 38 Special, and this other group, which has been calling itself the Solutions Caucus, which has worked with Democrats to pass a number of key pieces of legislation. So Speaker Galt and Senator Blaisdell, how cohesive are your caucuses, and what can we expect on that front and some of those internal tensions that we've seen play out in recent sessions?
A lot of the points that I ran on as speaker was to bring a Republican Party back together. And I've been working really hard to make everyone come in without, sides on either way. And I think we're going to be coming through with a very solid one Republican Party message this session.
Well, obviously, the election, there was a huge turnout of 81% of the voters turned out this time. I think the results on the statewide races and in the legislative races showed a point of what direction, they'd like to see the state lead. But with that also comes how to manage and legislate. I'm fortunate in the Senate, most of the members have all served together, either in the House or have served some time together in the Senate. And the way I view our caucus is, they're all on the Republican side is, I'd like to eliminate the hyphenated Republican portion and recognize that they're all Republicans that ran. They won their primaries. They ran in their districts. Some of them had hard-fought primaries against challengers, and they won. And the citizens in that district elected them, and so they have equal opportunity involvement in the Senate to be a part of the solutions. And I look at the Democratic Party as well. I think if you look over the last few sessions, you've seen, even though the Republicans have had the majority, it hasn't mattered whether it's a Republican or Democrat bill. If it's a bill that works, you haven't seen that party alliance to end those I think if you look through past sessions, I think it's been a pretty equal amount of bills by both parties passed as they've moved through the process. So unfortunately, the public doesn't always get to see that, but there has been some good work done on bipartisan efforts. I think Governor-elect Gina Forte has reached out to a number of the Democratic members and said, I want to see your ideas. I bring them forward. And so I think there's really good opportunity for everybody to work together.
So Senator Small, I'm interested in your take on this too. It's not always crystal clear who's a part of the Solutions Caucus and who's not, but you're certainly someone who's been linked to the Solutions Caucus at times, and we're right in the middle of one of the key divides in the last session when you carried that Medicaid expansion bill. So I'm curious about how you see that playing out in this year's session.
Well, make no mistake, I'm solidly in the middle. Just personal history upon myself. I'm kind of a big labor guy. I was the president of the Boilermakers union in Montana for nearly the last half a decade. So, I definitely support business and the Republican institution and in the thought process, but I also tend to take care of my fellow workers, the blue collar people. So I won't beat around the bush, I guess. Make no mistake, I'm going to Helena to win. I'll work with anybody, anytime, anywhere, make it happen, and bring something home that works and helps my constituency.
And Representative Abbott, given this new dynamic that you spoke of in your opening comments and unified Republican control in Helena, where does that leave Democrats? It seems to me in previous sessions, having a Democrat in the governor's office was a huge lever of power for the Democrats, and of course that's gone now. So I'm curious about the state of the Democratic caucus going into this thing. Is there a sense of demoralization or a concern about being marginalized? Or how are you and your caucus members approaching the new session and thinking about what kind of role you can play this time?
Yeah, our caucus has been in the minority for a while now. And so every piece of legislation that we've moved to the governor's desk has been bipartisan legislation. It's had to be, so some things don't change there. I think our caucus, we have a talented caucus. It's smaller than, the speaker and I had a conversation after the election where I said it was smaller than I expected it to be. There's no question about that. But it's a talented group of people, and the folks that are coming back from prior sessions have a lot of experience, and they have relationships. They have relationships with Wiley and Mark and Jason and other Republicans, where like the president said, if it's a good idea, I think it'll get a fair shake with the leadership that I see in front of me. And I think we can all count on a fair process and good ideas getting a fair debate. And as somebody that's representing a minority caucus, that's incredibly important. We understand that we don't have the numbers, but we do have experience, talent, and ideas. And so if we can elevate our ideas to the point where we can have, a fair debate on them, we think we can get them to the governor-elect's desk, and then, we can have a conversation with him about getting them signs. But we've always had to collaborate not always, but, for the last several sessions when we've been in the minority, we've had to collaborate, we've had to compromise. And I think that we've gotten good at moving good ideas through with collaboration with Republicans and with reasonable compromise. And we plan on doing that again, So, in terms of, I think everyone's excited for the challenge. I think, there are problems to solve, and there's anxiety about the way that we'll be together in Helena for sure. Like there's no question about that. but in terms of the challenge, I think we're up for it and the relationships are there.
Well, let's move on to the budget, right? The budget is always at the center of the legislature's work, but it seems to me it is more complicated this year, both in terms of the revenue stream with the pandemic and just the uncertainty around revenue predictions because of the pandemic. Speaker Galt, do you anticipate budget cuts? And if so, what specific cuts do you want to make to the state budget?
With the COVID hit that the budget has taken, I do see at least some cuts coming. What those are, I think it's too early to tell. I know that there's going to be a lot of real talented people looking through everything to make sure that we do everything the right way, and then that they're meaningful cuts that aren't going to be taking away a bunch of stuff. But we'll have a very conservative budget that will not end in tax increases to get us through this.
So one of the things we've heard both, I think, from the incoming governor and from a memo that was leaked to the press by one of your members is this term flat budget, right? Which might not necessarily mean cuts, at least in terms of the way that we often think about them, but holding the line on spending, which would involve some cuts with increases in just over the course of time. But are there any items that you and some of your members in the House see as kind of the low-hanging, obvious fruit to look at when we're talking about cuts? Or is it just that literally everything is on the table and you go in with no ideas about what might actually be under consideration on that?
Well, I think, the first thing we're going to look at is a lot of efficiencies in government. Like I said, it's been 16 years since Republicans had the second floor. So we're going to have new directors coming into these departments. I'm going to be able to start looking through them and see if we can find some efficiencies at first. And then it's going to be kind of a balancing act of, what doesn't get cut, what does get cut. But I know a flat budget is our goal. And I'm hoping that we get there.
Okay. Senator Blaisdell, Republicans have emphasized the need for tax relief, both in terms of property tax and income tax. What form do you think that relief should take, and how do you pay for that?
Well, obviously, this is a tough session. Going back a little bit to the budget, revenue projections there for a while is that we could see a decrease of anywhere up to about $500 million in state income taxes over the next 3 years, just with the variability of what has happened with the COVID-related shutdowns and just the changes of our economy. We just set the revenue estimate last week or 2 weeks, a couple weeks ago. Our legislative fiscal division and the Office of Budget Planning were about $180 million off. We actually lowered ours from the legislative analyst predictions by about 110 million to get a little bit closer to the governor's for right now, because I think there is so much variability. I serve on a chamber board as well, and a struggle that you have is there's almost kind of two parallel economies going on in Montana right now. You look at the hospitality industry, restaurants, a lot of those that are really, really struggling, downtown Main Street businesses. But then you look at real estate, construction market, manufacturing, grocery store, retail, some of those that are doing very, very well. And so I think it's very, very hard to see where we're at right now. Obviously, I think we're looking at both on what we can do, and including business equipment tax as well. There will be some challenges with funding and how much money is out there available for those tax cuts. We're looking at possibly looking back at, there was an income tax simplification bill from a few sessions ago that we're looking at maybe working on. property taxes is a challenge because the reality is all money that comes into the state, the 101 mills that's paid, all gets dispersed back out to the local school districts and local communities and to the universities. So we'll be taking a look at a lot of that as we work through the process. It's probably a little early to tell what those will look like. But obviously with this budget cycle, the way it is and unpredictability, there will be some challenges to make very significant tax cuts, but maybe we can make some moves towards that and set up some opportunities for the future.
So Representative Abbott, I'm interested in just your general thoughts about the budget, but maybe you could also speak to the ending fund balance. That's been a point of emphasis for Democrats in the past. And I'm interested in whether you think that needs to be a priority again and what might be realistic for the legislature to shoot for on that front.
Sure. I mean, I think, so I think when Democrats were hyper-focused on ending fund balance, it was prior to some policy changes that established, for lack of a better term, I think we call it a budget stabilization account, but colloquially it would be called like a rainy day fund. The most important thing is that we have the ability to operate in uncertain times, that we have some cushion. I think Democrats have been focused on having some cushion to avoid cuts that are detrimental to vulnerable communities, to programs and services that Montanans count on. And so, yes, we will be focused on that again. But we do have a budget stabilization account now that sort of lays out cuts and spending and the way that you can pull from reserves. And the president of the Senate, Blaisdell, would probably be better to explain the budget stabilization account than me, but that's in place now. From our perspective, we want to protect the folks that have been hit the hardest and the industries that have been hit the hardest by the economic turmoil that the pandemic's caused. And so I think we want to really prioritize our focus in revenue and budget on that. I'm not sure a present law budget would be a pretty good goal in economic times like this. And I'm not sure if a flat budget is the same thing. I'm not sure what the governor-elect means by a flat budget, but a present law budget would adjust to maintain what we are doing currently with our budget. And that would be, I think, a really reasonable goal for this session, to protect programs and services and pay special attention to folks that are hurting more, and families that are hurting more now, and industries that are hurting more now.
So Senator Small, I mentioned earlier, you carried that Medicaid bill in the last session. What do you foresee in terms of the Medicaid expansion? Are there changes under consideration for this session? Just any thoughts you have about that would be of interest to a lot of people, I think.
Okay, thank you. I'm not sure what everyone has under their belt, but I do support the governor-elect's position as he was running, was to maintain Medicaid expansion and not do a massive reform or try to get rid of it. So, if we don't remove or repeal it, it's such an economic driver that to me, it's very worthwhile. And then also living in these areas where I'm at, the extreme rural part of the state, I mean, it's keeping clinics, hospitals open, it's keeping people in jobs, and it's also funding IHS and it's hard to say the impact it's truly had. It's been a real lifesaver, quite literally. So to the best of my knowledge right now, nobody is really looking at doing a hardcore repeal or getting rid of it.
And Speaker Galt, Senator Blaisdell, is that your sense as well?
Yeah, from what I understand is that I haven't seen any sort of repeal. I know that the governor-elect said that he seemed that it sees the benefit of it. You know, we may take a look just again to check for efficiencies and make sure that's being used properly, but I don't see a repeal of it coming either.
And I'll echo some of that. Obviously, you know, our caucus was split on the passage of it. Senator Small did a great job on the behalf of the bill and sponsor Ed Buttrey from Great Falls when they worked through that. I do think that what you're going to see is obviously there is a sunset on that bill for 2023, I believe. So it will be revisited in the upcoming session. We'll see actually what happens back in DC as they work through some of that too with you know, some things back there. But you know, I think one of the important notes maybe is to look at there were some amendments put on that bill for income verification, work requirements, community benefit of involvement, and so forth like that. I think a lot of those maybe haven't been enforced or as looked at as possibly as they could. So that may be some opportunities. But I look for changes on this. Obviously, I think if the sponsor of the bill, Representative Ed Buttrey, who's worked on this for quite a number of years, if he sees something that he thinks can pass and work through the process, then I think you may see that. But it'll be challenging to make any significant changes to it at this time, and obviously it'll be revisited in another session.
Okay, Senator Small, I mentioned at the outset that you chaired the interim committee on state tribal relations, and you spoke about that a little bit in your opening comments. But what issues in that space, maybe in some more specific detail, are you hoping to see move through the legislature this session?
Yes, so there will be a host of committee bills coming through. A lot of it focusing on MMIW, MMIP, you know, which is an extremely large issue. We have some one request bill coming from the tribe about a little bit of additional enforcement help. Oh, gee whiz. I mean, we have a list of them coming. You know, the key points with the tribes as you get together throughout the year and you're talking and myself being in direct contact constantly right here is, you know, a lot of them wanted to see more economic development opportunity. They need to maintain what we have as ICE funding. They call it ICE, Indian Country Economic Development. It's a grant system the state has. Business activity on these reservations. They love it. We need to try to keep that or even up slightly the amounts given to individuals. We have a limitless amount of social issues at all times, whether it be, you know, we have, substance abuse issues, violence, domestic violence, stuff like that. Things people are relentlessly working on nonstop and trying to correct. And myself, my key driver, the thing that I want to see the most is enhanced economic development opportunity. And I'm on board with broadband. We've seen this year in my area in particular, a lack of broadband. These kids going to school, I mean, it's tough. We're having educational issues because of it. We need more internet here if we're going to support these small businesses. You know, cottage industry, it could take off. The tribes, we tend to have a problem on these reservations with what I believe is actually just too much government. We have 7 or 8 layers of government here to fight your way through, and as everybody knows, the bureaucracy is not very efficient. So in order to help drive the economy here and to keep people going, up the employment rate, and just in general have a better outcome from everybody, we need to embrace these small businesses that individuals themselves are starting up and bringing internet infrastructure and allowing them to access markets that aren't really close to them is probably the key in my viewpoint. Did I answer your question?
Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks. Thanks, Senator. So I've got one more for you, and then I want to go to some questions from the audience. But the last thing I want to ask you all about are abortion bills. So there have been several abortion bills that have been vetoed by Democratic governors over the last 16 years. And the United States Supreme Court obviously also looks a lot different than it did just a few years ago. So will we be seeing some of those abortion bills come back this session with the expectation that they would get a much warmer reception from Governor Gianforte? And I'll just throw that out to whoever would like to address it.
Sure. Obviously, I always point to the legislature as we're kind of the melting pot of Montana. You have a very diverse group of individuals that come, and obviously every individual has different views of what they paid the $15 to sign their name on the line. Some of them have campaigned for over a year to be down here. And in the state of Montana, every bill gets to have a hearing, and every legislator gets to bring any idea or anything possible that they would like forward. I do believe there will be some of those bills. Obviously, we're reaching out to our caucus members right now to see what interest they have and what I think you'll see a couple of maybe that have been vetoed in the past, such as, during a botched abortion, if a baby is born alive, should that baby, everything be done medically possible to keep the baby alive. I think you've seen some of like the Fetal Pain Act and so forth. So I don't necessarily know how many bills or what will come, but I think there are a few that will come that the caucus is more interested in than others. But as I've said, we're a very diverse caucus with very differing interests in what we want to bring through this legislature. And so, each legislator will bring what they've told their constituents that they believe are important for the session.
Anyone else on that?
I mean, I'll just say for our caucus that, a woman's self-determination in the area of family is fundamental from our view as a value. And so we would oppose restrictions on that. And I think, in the past few sessions, we've been able to find ways to prevent some of those bills from getting to the governor's desk. But access to reproductive health care for women is a pretty central value of the Democratic caucus, and we'll bring that to the building.
Okay, so let's go to some questions from the audience, and I'm pulling these both from the chat function here on Zoom, but also from Facebook, and I'm going to try to combine a few of those. But I'm interested to hear you all talk about in a little bit more detail than you did at the beginning, just about the pandemic backdrop for this session, and what kind of public health protections are going to be in place. We have seen across the country some other legislatures run into some pretty serious trouble internally, but just in terms of you all as legislators and your caucuses, the members of the staff at the Capitol, and then of course members of the public who want to come in and provide input on things that you're taking up. What is that going to look like? And what measures are you taking? And is there any possibility that this session gets changed in some serious way, either postponed or done all remotely? Or what do you all anticipate that looking like?
I would say it's hard to say, and I wouldn't say no to any of the above. I mean, we're working hard through it. I know I am currently in talks with the speakers of South Dakota, Iowa, and Wyoming at the moment. Just kind of all of us are throwing ideas together to see which one's doing which and kind of taking a big broad state look at, what ideas are out there to, get through this. I personally believe that public participation is paramount. So I know we're going to work very hard to have at least some form of that, be remote participation or safely in person. But, safety and public participation are high on our list to make sure that we get done.
I'll expand a little bit on that. Obviously, it's, is challenging. Caucuses were a week later than usual for elected leadership. We had Thanksgiving, which then pushes the Rules Committee back to next week, which typically it's this week. And obviously, I know everybody's looking for answers. What we've actually done for next week with the Rules Committee is we're going to set it up for a little bit longer time than we'd actually planned. Our hope is to have a great dialogue between both parties. Exploring the options, exploring the opportunities of how we can do this. I think we've polled our Senate caucus members. I believe all of them plan to try to be there in person as much as possible. They believe it's their way of being able to be engaged in the process. Obviously, we're working with the minority parties too. I know members of theirs have different concerns and different That's why we're looking at hybrid virtual options for members that are concerned and so they can engage not only in their committee hearings but also on floor votes. The staff has worked through kind of a two-party authentication voting system for members that maybe need to be out of the Capitol or have concerns about being on the floor, that they'll be able to partake and vote in person, and we can identify that the right person is voting. So we're working through that. Obviously, I think it's paramount to have public participation. Obviously, I'd love to have in-person testimony. We're also exploring the opportunities of possibly having some remote places here for testimony in Helena, hopefully maybe on the state complex, where those individuals that aren't comfortable coming to the Capitol may have an opportunity to go and engage and partake in that. We'll be looking tomorrow with staff about possible some form of a Zoom testimony for members of the public. Obviously, most states that have done this have limited how many folks are able to register for that because you could open up certain bills that you could have testimony from across the world and be involved in and have some very long hearings on that. So a lot of states are allowing it. They have a registration time. So many are allowed. And then also we'll also have some sort of platform like we have in the past for public testimony, written testimony, to make sure that can get out to the committee members. So we're exploring a lot of those options. Obviously, to do it, we're reaching out to staff. My hope is that we can find out from staff their comfort level so that they can work remotely out of the committee hearings if they would like to, or from their offices, but have the ability for the committee members, both that are on virtual and those that are in the rooms, to be able to partake and ask them questions as well. So we're working through all those options. Hopefully we can have a very good dialogue next week. There's discussions of maybe working and possibly making it where the leadership is on some kind of a COVID committee so that we can be nimble and flexible as the session prolongs. Because obviously, the reality is we recognize that there's been challenges in other states and so forth. And we're going to have to be flexible this session, and we're going to have to understand that things aren't going to be normal all the time, and try to do as much as we can with that. So.
Yeah, our caucus thinks that the legislature should follow local county public health recommendations and directives in the way that we do business. I think Mark and Wiley and Jason and I all care about the health of our members, the health of the public, the press corps, our staff. So I just want to say that we agree on that. Our approach is going to be different, I think, sometimes. So we believe that we should be following local public health protocols and recommendations. And then as a framework to approach the session, I think within those recommendations and directives, we should be trying to reduce the number of people in the building at the same time and increase compliance with those public health recommendations and directives through policies and procedures. And I think that's the framework that our caucus is approaching this with, and in conversations with Republican leadership. I also look forward to our conversations next week at the Rules Committee and think it'll be robust with various ideas to move forward. And I do agree with President Blaisdell that we will have to be nimble and we will have to be flexible, and we have to put the health of our communities at the forefront. And I hope that we can figure out a way forward on that, to do the people's business in a safe way.
So sticking with COVID here for another minute, I'm going to combine again a few different questions into one that I hopefully gets to the a number of different people's concerns. So one of the things that we've heard talk of is removing some of the authority that the governor has and that local health boards have to enforce pandemic restrictions. This was, for instance, in that memo that I mentioned earlier from some of the members of the Republican caucus in the House. And this has, for a number of people, been something of real concern. And so I'd be interested, especially in the Republican leaders, in terms of what their thinking is on that. Is that something they're supportive of, and do they anticipate that going through?
Yeah, I know we've been talking about it a lot, and our big concern, especially with the governor's powers, is that he was kind of able to call the state of emergency, had $1.25 billion, brought to him, and the legislature didn't have a say on anything, and what we felt that if you could have more people in mind there, especially when it came to that stimulus money, that it could have been used more effectively across different people that, had different thoughts through it. With the local health officials, I think a lot of that is just having a check and balance of something that the people are able to vote on instead of just an appointed person, and to have a little recourse that way.
I'll add just, is it on? Yeah. I'll add just, obviously, I think it's been kind of a wake-up call a little bit for the legislature. Some of these codes have been in place for, I've heard, up to almost 100 years, because really we haven't faced something like this for a long, long time. I don't think the Republican majority or anybody wants to take the ability for a local public official or board or even the governor to make a snap judgment decision on the day when there's a crisis or something going on, that they need to be able to make a decision very fast. They don't have time to be able to go through a process. I think what we're looking at is where we've seen this emergency order go for a long extent of time through the governor's office, that is there a point in time, 30 days or so forth, that maybe then the legislature needs to be able to be engaged, maybe by a poll or something like that. Same at the local level, maybe after a portion of time, that at some point in time, I think it's important that somebody that is elected by the people, be it the county commissioners, be it the local school boards, be it the city officials, at some point in time that those folks that have to go back and ask for a vote of the public get the chance to weigh in on this and make a decision as well. And in the Flathead, I hear a lot of frustration of that there's no way to hold anybody accountable if we're not ever voting for the people making these decisions.
Um, so I actually think we have a process that works pretty well. You have classic executive powers in the emergency authority. And then a check to that is the legislature's ability to call themselves into special session to debate publicly anything that they want to check in that authority. On the local level, local county health boards are appointed by elected officials in the county commission. The county commission has the ability to check the county health boards. And in a lot of localities, there's the ability through petition to check boards. So I think the checks are there. Like whether they got used appropriately or not is a different question. I'm not sure we need to change the checks on these authorities. I do agree with Mark that these haven't been used in this way in a long time. And so I think people were probably less familiar with what they had available to them. And so maybe there's an education component there, but I'm not sure we need to change much. I think it works fine and the checks are there for the public.
Yeah, can I weigh in on that?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I'm in agreement with the president. I mean, the local health board needs to, or to an extent at least, the local public health board needs to maintain the ability to designate something an emergency or not. But I think for continuity purposes, to keep that up, to keep that status active, the local government does need to weigh in, and they can maintain the status or deny it. It's up to them at that point, your elected officials.
Great. So shifting gears a little bit, I've seen a number of questions pop up about schools and in particular, the funding of private schools. Would be interested to hear any and all of you speak to that issue.
Well, obviously, we're still working through that process. We'll see what bills come out. I haven't seen any kind of priorities of that from the governor-elect or members of our caucus as far as private school choice goes yet, but obviously there's members that are interested in that. I point back to a bill that was passed a few sessions ago with the Big Sky Scholarship Fund that actually went up to the Supreme Court with the Espinoza decision. So whether there's ways to work through that and maybe expand the credit to a larger amount or so forth, we'll see. But I think Governor-elect during the campaign, I heard him numerous times also say that public education is very important. He's very interested in working to try to get more money into first and second year teachers and help them with the challenges they have of coming straight out of college and right into the education and make a living wage. I think I want to point back to last session. I believe the inflationary increase for education is around $70 million for 2 years, would be for this upcoming biennium. Last session was probably the fastest that inflationary increases ever went through. So we'll be working with the appropriations team on that. Obviously, I think it's important for the local school boards to be able to know where they're at so they can start making decisions for upcoming. But as I've said in the campaign trail, I'm a product of both public and private education. I've had both. I believe both are important in our communities, and so we'll work through that process. But I have not seen any major pieces that are kind of flagship legislation yet. No.
Anyone else care to speak to that?
Our caucus supports our public education system, and we were thrilled last session, as Mark said, when the inflationary increase went through so smoothly, and we would oppose any privatization of public education proposals like that.
Okay, well, sticking on education, here is one from Jack. Jack says, I'm a student at the University of Montana, and both myself and many of my peers have heard of potential reductions in funding for higher education. There have been previous comments regarding general budgetary cuts. Can any of you speak to the status of higher education funding?
I'll just speak briefly. I have not heard of status on cuts. I know it's always a challenge. I'm not sure on the amount, but typically think it's around $15-20 million is kind of the inflationary increase that usually goes through Section E for the universities to go to the Board of Regents. I want to say it's been around that amount each time when we've tried to freeze tuition or do as best as we can. I think everything's going to be challenging this session, especially this first year of the biennium. That's where we're seeing the biggest hit. But we've got a good team on that Section B subcommittee or Section E subcommittee that's worked on it for a long time. I think they've done a lot of good work working with the Board of Regents and the college presidents to not only enhance efficiencies, but also see how we can do to maintain the levels that we can.
I haven't heard of any specific cuts to higher ed. I will say that our investment in higher education, public higher education in Montana has been falling behind, and we need to get a handle on that, get in front of it, and increase in investment. But as we've talked about, over the course of this evening in this conversation, this is a tough session to increase investment. But we need to understand that we are falling behind, I think, in higher ed investment and make sure that it continues to be something we're looking at and prioritizing going forward.
Well, again, do a kind of combo question. A number of people have noted, and indeed some of you have noted, that through the pandemic, a number of people have been hit hard. Of course, not everyone, but some people have been hit very hard. Are there things that the legislature and the governor can do to speak to those direct concerns, be it people who are workers in industries, parts of the economy that have taken a hit? The issue of affordable housing, interestingly, I think is at least in some of our communities, in Missoula and Bozeman and the Flathead, has only increased during these pandemic months. So there are a lot of people in our state who are kind of really feeling the pinch here. Are there things that the legislature and the governor can do to address some of those people on the margins or who have fallen on hard times here, despite the what's obviously going to be a very tight budget?
I'll try a little bit here. Obviously, I think we need to come in and do our business and work hard. As I've said, I'm in one of those industries that's been hit hard with this. You went through the lockdown. I think a lot of us business owners, we did the shutdown. We played by the rules. We understood where we were at that time. But I tell you, as a small business owner, it was a challenge. It was a challenge to look around and see kind of the inequities of some businesses that were told that they had to close their doors or try to work around a process that maybe they didn't have in place. But then you could walk into a grocery store and be right next to somebody, or you could go to Costco, furniture stores that were told that they had to close for a certain amount of time. But yet anybody could walk out to Costco and buy any furniture that they wanted that was out there on the display. So as small business owners, I mean, it's been a challenge. We've done a lot to try to push people to shop local and to buy local and support your local business. And now we've kind of pushed everybody back to buying online. And the challenge is there's a lot of folks that are very scared. And there's a lot of people that have really changed their lifestyles. and how they do that. I know in the restaurant business, I think during the lockdown, a lot of people found what that room called a kitchen was, that usually they may have went out and dined 4 or 5 nights a week. And they found that it was easier to come home and cook dinner. And so I've seen a huge change in the customers and how they handle going out to places. A lot more takeout, a lot more delivery, a lot more of those kind of things. But I think one of the things the legislature needs to work on is some predictability. I think a lot of businesses don't know how to handle both the liability portion of it and how to engage and work with their customers. I know the mask mandate's a hot topic here in the state, but I see the challenges every day that businesses face where they're put in the middle between customers. I feel so bad when you go to a grocery store and you see a store manager being chewed out because somebody went down the wrong aisle where a directional arrow was, or somebody, didn't invaded in somebody's space. And, it's a tough situation for these employees as they try to work through that. And it's a challenge because we've got a very distinct view and diverse view in the state of Montana on some of these policies, especially as they've went on for as long as they have, that these businesses are having to try to navigate right now. So there's a lot of challenges for these businesses.
Yeah, in terms of understanding the sectors that have been hit hardest and focusing support on them, state budgets, they can't deficit spend in situations like this, don't allow for it. And you'll look around Colorado, I think Minnesota, are looking to put together packages because the federal government isn't responding right now. The truth of the matter is that we need a congressional relief package that can help these sectors and help employees. I mean, we have a cliff coming up on unemployment benefits that the state of Montana is simply not in a position to fill that gap. We need federal support to do that. In terms of the things that we can do as a state, I think, to keep our local economies open, we need increased compliance with public health recommendations. I mean, that's the truth of it. And I agree with Mark. The enforcement of this stuff is a nightmare. You have various entities being put in the middle of things. And what we need is for generally community members to understand that this is a shared sacrifice, and we need to mask up. We need to comply with local public health orders in order to keep our local economies going. And beyond that, budgetarily, we really do need federal help. We need federal support in order to support these industries and support these workers. And so I hope that our congressional delegation will work hard to get that to us, because that's the solution available to us, I think.
All right. Well, thanks, everyone. We got, I think what's a great question to close with, and this comes in from Facebook, and would love to just go around and hear from everyone one more time, and you can address this directly or speak to anything else that has caught your attention from the discussion tonight. So our person from Facebook asks, clearly you are all making an effort to reach out, to be collaborative and respectful with those who you may have some disagreements with. What specific efforts are you making to develop a sense of camaraderie among you all as legislators elected for the common good of the state? And what specific legislation do you think will pass that would have strong endorsement across the board? Are there some things that that Democrats and Republicans can agree on? And Representative Abbott, why don't we start with you, and then we'll just go through again in alphabetical order and wrap up after this.
Sure, thanks. And while I have the chance, thanks again for having me. This has been great, and it's great to see Wiley and Mark and Jason. we agree, like the parties agree on a whole lot of basic things that make government function. When you look at the board and you look at votes, like a whole bunch of stuff is passing with huge majorities, right? So like we can agree on things and we can work on things together. I think even tonight we've heard inflationary increase for public education. We've heard broadband, rural broadband. You know, these are things that I think we might have slightly different visions on rural broadband and how we get it done, but I think there's a place to move. There's a sense of priority and urgency there. So I think there are things that we can move together to get to the governor-elect's desk for his decision. And in terms of camaraderie, I mean, I said it before in this conversation, I know these three human beings, and I know they care about the safety and well-being of Montanans, so as we approach this session, I think that we can work together to try to make it a safe workplace and try to make it go as smoothly as possible, because I know that we have the same sense of responsibility to Montanans. And so I think that's where we can build some camaraderie for sure.
Speaker?
Oh, did you want the speaker?
Or your president, go ahead.
I'll echo a lot of Representative Abbott said. One of my favorite days each week during the session is leadership gets to have lunch with the Pages when the high school kids come and partake in the legislative session. And one of the questions we always ask them is, name me one thing that surprised you about the legislative session that you didn't expect. And I can guarantee you the number one answer that always is said is, you guys get along a lot better than what we read about or see in the news. And that's always refreshing. And unfortunately, that's not something the public always gets to see. Tensions get high. I think the challenge with camaraderie this time is the challenge with virtual and some folks not being in the Capitol. I mean, because there's a bond that grows between legislators as you go through this 90-day session. And the relationships and friendships that you gain through this are pretty incredible. I've met people from all across the state. I think there's a lot of things that we'll be able to work on, business related and so forth throughout this session. I'm excited to work on the broadband bill. I know we had one last session. There was some consternation because it allowed for a moratorium on the tax for a few years. Ultimately, it was vetoed, but I think it's something that's important. And I think during this pandemic, we've seen some of these things that have really emphasized that we have some opportunities, even access to healthcare through telemedicine and so forth. I think we've opened our eyes to a lot of opportunities here to be more efficient as well. And I think we're going to be able to work together by both parties to do that as well. So I look forward to an engaging session. Obviously, my hope is that we can be safe, but be productive and get through this session and do a good job for the state of Montana.
And I'll echo a little bit of what the president said. It's going to be hard this session to create a lot of the friendships we've had in the past without as much in person as we're used to. I know we usually have a big dinner during caucuses where everyone both parties gets to get together, meet up, and actually meet face to face and talk with each other. So it's going to be an interesting hurdle to get over, but I think we will. I think a majority of the legislation we pass is bipartisan. I know the minority leader and I have had lots of discussions that we've agreed that we'll have our fights when we have our fights, and we'll work together when we can, and we'll always go have a drink afterwards.
I'll go. Yeah, I have to mirror a lot of sentiment from everybody there. One of the most impressive things in the past 4 years for me has been the fact that even though people agree to disagree and you have your little squabbles here and there, at the end of the day, you tend to get along pretty well. It's just you're learning somebody else's thought process, and you can't discount them. Everybody comes from a little bit different place. And in all honesty, just in the past 4 years in the legislature, I've met more people that I would consider friends than I have in the rest of my life. I've met a whole host of people that I talk to with a lot of consistency and phone calls, messages, whatever. And I've been impressed with the fact that everybody does get along as well as they do. And on my end, I'm about the broadband. I kind of agree with everybody else. We need to get it going, get it moving, get it in place, and help it. I mean, it's a twofold deal. It's going to help improve our educational system as long as we maintain the situation we're in, and it's also just going to be another economic driver. It's a tool we need in the state to help everybody keep going. And with that, thank you for letting me speak today.
Well, thanks to all of you. Really appreciate it. Minority Leader Abbott, President Blaisdell, Speaker Galt, Senator Small. I know you all are very busy at this time of year, gearing up for the session. Really appreciate you taking some time. And of course, good luck for a productive and safe session. Also want to thank our audience for joining us. And please, if you haven't registered for our session next week, which will be our final Mansfield Dialogue of the semester, do consider joining us. That is next Wednesday. We'll be hearing from former Deputy Secretary General of NATO, Rose Gottmaler, who will discuss the challenges that lie ahead for U.S. foreign policy, especially its relations with NATO. And that event will be sponsored, or co-sponsored, I should say, by Montanans for National Security. So with that, I will say good night from the Mansfield Center. Thanks again to everyone.